You are pathetic, my stepsister, Brielle whispered, her voice a venomous little hiss that sliced through the party's cheerful hum. Enjoy the crumbs. She gestured with her chin towards the plate the caterer had just set before me. On the pristine white porcelain, where 60 other guests had a perfectly seared filet mignon, sat a single, sad, dry bread roll. Nothing else. My name is Auden Vance. I'm 28, and for the last decade, I've been the family's favorite ghost. I'm the person whose presence is acknowledged with a tight, obligatory smile before eyes slide away to someone more important, more interesting, more Vance. To them, I am a freelance data analyst for nonprofits. It's a carefully constructed narrative, plausible and just pathetic enough for them to swallow. It explains my small, minimalist apartment in a city an hour away, my sensible four-door sedan, and my wardrobe that they would call sustainable, but mean cheap. It's a life that stands in stark, deliberate contrast to the opulent grandeur of the Vance estate, a sprawling mansion where the wine costs more per bottle than my monthly grocery bill, a place I was required to visit for command performance family events like this one, my father's 60th birthday. I existed in their world as a piece of inconvenient furniture from a previous marriage. I was a quiet, unassuming failure, a constant, slightly embarrassing reminder of a time before my stepmother, Jocelyn, and her perfect daughter, Brielle, had perfected the Vance brand. My success was invisible, my struggles were magnified, and my worth, as they had just so publicly declared, was that of a stale piece of bread. They had no idea that the ghost they ignored was the one about to haunt them. And for my speech, I wasn't planning on talking. I was planning on projecting the final slide of my company's acquisition report, the one with my name as the new owner. The ghost wasn't always a ghost. At 20, I was a girl buzzing with ideas, naive enough to believe that a good enough plan could bridge the chasm between my father and me. I spent a whole semester in a business strategy course, not just doing the coursework, but applying every lesson to Vance manufacturing. I built a 40-page proposal, complete with financial models and efficiency projections, outlining a plan to modernize one of their aging production lines. It would increase output by 30% and cut waste by half. I found my father, Harrison, in his study, the room smelling of old leather and accomplishment. For a moment, as I laid out the binders and charts, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be. The man who taught me how to read stock tickers before I could ride a bike. This is impressive, Auden, he murmured, tracing a finger over a projected cost analysis chart. Really impressive. A spark of hope ignited in my chest. It was a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Then, the door opened, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Jocelyn glided in, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. She peered at my presentation, her lips pursed in a semblance of interest that was more insulting than outright dismissal. "Oh, how sweet," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "A little school project." She patted my father's shoulder. "Harrison, darling, that's adorable, but let's leave the business to the professionals, shall we? You have enough on your plate." She turned to me, her smile never reaching her cold eyes. "Besides, we have real news to celebrate. Brielle just made the dean's list again. She's focusing on her art history major. A woman of culture." The flicker in my father's eyes died. He straightened his tie, pushed my proposal to the side of his massive desk, and cleared his throat. "Yes, of course. Well done, Auden. Good effort. Good effort." The two words he used to dismiss a plan that could have saved his company millions. The two words that taught me my intelligence was a sweet hobby, while Brielle's C+ in Renaissance pottery was a sign of cultural superiority. That was the day I stopped trying to show him my plans. I started building them for myself instead. The final lesson in my perceived worthlessness came 2 years later, courtesy of my grandmother's will. She was my father's mother, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who saw through Jocelyn's polished facade from day one. She was my only real ally in the family, and her passing left a void that felt like a physical wound. We were all gathered in a stuffy lawyer's office. The bulk of the estate, as expected, went to my father. Then came the smaller bequests. The lawyer cleared his throat. To her granddaughter, Brielle Vance, Mrs. Vance leaves her collection of pearl jewelry. Brielle preened, already imagining how they'd look on her. And to her granddaughter, Auden Vance, he continued, Mrs. Vance leaves her personal collection of first-edition business biographies, and the sum of $10,000. A heavy silence fell over the room. $10,000. In a family where that amount was spent on a weekend getaway, it felt like an insult. Brielle was the first to break the silence with a poorly suppressed giggle. Wow, $10,000. That's like a whole year's rent for your tiny apartment, right, Auden? Jocelyn placed a comforting hand on Brielle's arm, though her eyes were dancing with malicious glee. Now, Brielle. It's a lovely gesture. A very practical sum, for someone in her position. They saw it as a final, pitying handout. A pittance for the poor relation. They couldn't see what my grandmother had truly given me. She hadn't given me charity. She had given me ammunition. She had given me the seed money. As I sat there, absorbing their scorn, I didn't feel shame. I felt a cold, clarifying resolve. This wasn't an insult. It was an investment. In my mind, I could already hear the name of the company it would build, Nexus Capital. And it would be a nexus of power they would never see coming. Building an empire in secret requires a meticulous dedication to the mundane. For years, I perfected my cover. I took on a few, real, low-paying data analysis gigs for charities to create a paper trail. I learned to speak about my work with a convincing mixture of earnestness and mild boredom. But sometimes, the mask would slip. It happened about 6 months before the party. During one of our mandatory Sunday dinners, my phone buzzed with an encrypted alert. A deal in its final, critical stages required my immediate input. I excused myself, stepping out onto the veranda. No, the terms are non-negotiable, I said, my voice low and sharp. We proceed with the leveraged buyout only if we get full board control. Run the final due diligence. I want the shareholder report on my desk by Monday. When I turned around, Brielle was standing in the doorway, a smirk playing on her lips. Leveraged buyout? Shareholder reports. Sounds a little intense for a charity that saves stray cats, Auden. My heart didn't even flutter. I had rehearsed for this. I gave her a weary smile. You have no idea. This nonprofit I'm helping is fighting a hostile takeover of their community land. Some big real estate corporation is trying to bully them into selling. I sighed dramatically. It's David versus Goliath. I'm just trying to give David a better slingshot. The lie was perfect. It was self-deprecating, noble, and it painted me as the underdog's champion, a role they were comfortable with me playing. Brielle's suspicion dissolved into her usual condescension. Wow. So you're still playing make-believe in the big leagues, she said, shaking her head as she walked away. How cute. She had no idea how big the leagues were, or that I wasn't playing make-believe. I owned the stadium. The air in the grand ballroom of the Vance estate was thick with the scent of lilies and money. Hundreds of white lilies, Jocelyn's favorite, overflowed from massive crystal vases, their funereal smell a cloying backdrop to the clinking of champagne glasses. 60 of my father's closest friends and business associates milled about, a sea of expensive suits and glittering jewelry. I felt the familiar cloak of invisibility settle over me the moment I walked through the door. I was a glitch in their perfect matrix. I handed my father his gift, a rare, leather-bound edition of his favorite economic treatise I'd spent months tracking down. He gave me a brief, distracted hug. Thank you, Auden. Wonderful. He placed it on a table already groaning with extravagant presents, where it was immediately dwarfed by a set of custom golf clubs and a diamond-studded watch. Jocelyn glided over, her smile as dazzling and hard as the jewels at her throat. She gave me an air kiss that didn't come within 6 inches of my cheek. "Auden, you made it. How lovely." Brielle was right behind her, looking me up and down in my simple, elegant navy dress. It was a designer piece, but one so understated they wouldn't recognize the label. To them, it just looked plain. "Oh, Auden," Brielle cooed, her voice loud enough for her friends to hear. "It's so brave of you to be sustainable and wear vintage. Really setting an example." I just smiled faintly. There was no point in rising to the bait. Years of this had taught me that their game had only one rule: I could never win. So, I stopped playing. Across the room, I caught the eye of my Aunt Genevieve, my father's sister. She was a woman who, like my grandmother, had a built-in bullshit detector that went off like a fire alarm whenever Jocelyn was near. She saw the exchange with Brielle and gave me a subtle, sympathetic smile and a slight roll of her eyes. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. It was the silent acknowledgement that I wasn't crazy, that the poison they dripped was real. It was the reminder that even in a room full of enemies, I had one ally. And tonight, one was all I would need. The move from cocktails to dinner was orchestrated with military precision. We were seated at the massive head table, a long, imposing stretch of white linen and polished silver. I found my place card wedged between a distant cousin I hadn't seen in a decade and an empty chair. The guest of honor, my father, was seated at the center, flanked by his radiant wife and perfect daughter. The first 2 courses came and went, a delicate lobster bisque, a vibrant artisanal salad. I ate mechanically, the food tasteless in my mouth. The main course was the main event, a perfectly cooked filet mignon with a red wine reduction. The scent filled the air, rich and savory. The caterers moved with silent efficiency. Plates were placed before each guest with a flourish. But when the young waiter, he couldn't have been more than 19, reached my seat, he hesitated. He looked nervous, his eyes darting towards Jocelyn at the end of the table. She saw his hesitation and seized the moment. She raised her voice, not shouting, but projecting it with the practiced skill of a society hostess, ensuring everyone at the head table could hear. "Oh, the caterer knows," she announced, a tone of false concern in her voice. "Auden is on a very specific cleanse. She has to be so careful. Just the bread basket for her. We wouldn't want her to feel left out, of course." The lie was audacious, breathtaking in its cruelty. It wasn't just an insult, it was a performance. It painted her as a caring stepmother and me as a difficult, attention-seeking child with a trendy eating disorder. The young waiter flushed, utterly mortified. He mumbled an apology and retreated, returning a moment later with a small silver basket. From it, he used a pair of tongs to place a single, plain, dry bread roll onto the center of my dinner plate. The silence at our end of the table was deafening. The distant cousin stared at her plate. Then, under the cover of a swell of laughter from the other end of the table, Brielle leaned towards me. Her perfume was sickly sweet. Her voice was a low, venomous whisper, for my ears only. "You are pathetic," she hissed. "Enjoy the crumbs." In that moment, something inside me went quiet. I looked past Brielle, past Jocelyn's triumphant smirk, and my eyes landed on my father. I was pleading with him, silently begging him to say something. To correct the lie. To defend his daughter. He met my gaze for a fraction of a second. I saw a flicker of shame, of discomfort. And then, he looked away. He picked up his wine glass, took a deliberate sip, and turned to the guest on his other side, laughing at a joke I hadn't heard. That was it. That was the moment the last, stubborn thread of hope I'd clung to for 28 years finally snapped. It wasn't the bread. It was him. It was the realization that he would always, always choose them. He would always choose the easy, peaceful lie over the difficult, messy truth. He would let them starve me at his own birthday feast. There were no tears. The searing rage I should have felt was absent, replaced by something far colder, far more final. It was the icy calm of a battlefield after the battle is lost and the only thing left to do is tally the dead. The part of me that had craved my father's approval, that had hoped for a place in his family, had just died. And I did not mourn it. I looked at the bread roll sitting alone in the middle of my plate. A symbol. My inheritance. My worth. Slowly, deliberately, I picked it up. I did not crumble it. I did not throw it. I looked directly at Jocelyn, whose smile faltered slightly at my lack of a hysterical reaction. I held her gaze as I took a slow, methodical bite. I chewed, swallowed, and then took another. I would eat their insult. I would digest their contempt and turn it into fuel. While their attention was on my strange, silent compliance, my hand moved under the table. I unlocked my phone, my thumbprint opening a world they couldn't even imagine. I navigated to a secure messaging app, my fingers moving with practiced speed. There was a draft, saved for an occasion just like this. A message to my chief technical officer, a man who knew me only as Ense for Nexus Capital. The message was a single, pre-written command. I read it one last time. My thumb hovered over the send button. This was it. The point of no return. There was no going back to being the ghost. Ghosts are invisible. I was about to become the only thing they could see. I pressed send. The message was delivered instantly across the city. The command was simple. It was clear. It was final. Execute Protocol Pandora. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Let me know in the comments what city you're in. Every comment helps the story reach more people. Thank you so much. After the plates were cleared and the dessert, a ridiculously overwrought chocolate lava cake I was also not offered, was served, the speeches began. Brielle went first, delivering a gushing, vapid tribute to the best daddy in the world, filled with clichés she'd clearly pulled from a Hallmark card. It was met with polite, warm applause. Then, Jocelyn stood up. She looked radiant under the soft lights, the perfect matriarch. She spoke of her love for Harrison, her pride in their family. Then she turned her gaze to me, her eyes glittering with malice. And we're so thrilled that Harrison's other daughter, Auden, could join us tonight, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Auden, would you like to come up and say a few words about your father? It was a trap, and everyone knew it. She was handing me a shovel and expecting me to dig my own social grave in front of 60 people. She expected me to stumble, to be awkward, to prove, once and for all, that I did not belong. The room fell quiet, a predatory stillness settling over the guests. I placed my napkin on the table and stood. I didn't rush. I walked to the podium with a poise that seemed to unnerve them. It wasn't the walk of their designated failure. It was the walk of a CEO approaching a lectern. I adjusted the microphone, the small squeak of feedback echoing in the silent room. Thank you, Jocelyn, I said, my voice even and clear. I looked out at the expectant faces. I'm not going to talk about the past. A flicker of confusion crossed Jocelyn's face. Instead, I continued, turning my gaze to my father. I want to give my father a gift. A gift for the future. A gift for the one thing he built his life around, Vance Manufacturing. I reached down and calmly connected my sleek, black laptop to the projector system the DJ had set up for a planned photo slideshow. The screen behind me, which had been displaying a rotating gallery of awkward family photos, flickered and went dark. A low murmur went through the crowd. This was not on the program. I typed in a password, and the screen came to life, not with a picture, but with a crisp, corporate logo. The first slide was simple. The proud, familiar logo of Vance Manufacturing. It hung there for a moment, a symbol of my father's life's work. A few people nodded in appreciation. Then I clicked the button. The next slide was a line graph. Title: 5-year revenue trend. A single, jagged red line started high on the left and plummeted sharply to the right. A wave of uneasy murmurs rippled through the ballroom. I saw Mr. Davies, my father's oldest business partner, lean forward, his jovial party face replaced by a pale mask of concern. Click. The third slide was a stark, black and white table. Title: Outstanding Liabilities. It was a list of creditors, of bank loans, of unpaid vendor invoices. At the bottom, in a bold, impossible-to-ignore font, was the total. $5,200,000. The murmuring stopped. The silence that replaced it was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. I didn't need to look at my father, I could feel his humiliation radiating across the room. Jocelyn's face, which had been a mask of smug amusement, had frozen. Click. Slide 4. Just 3 words in a clean, modern font over the faded Vance logo: acquisition proposal. Below them, the logo of a company no one in that room recognized. A stylized N and C. Nexus Capital. I let that hang in the air for 5 long seconds. I could hear someone's sharp intake of breath. Then, the final click. The kill shot. The last slide was a simple organizational chart. It had only one box at the top. Inside that box was a professional headshot, one taken in a studio last month. My hair was styled, my makeup was flawless, and I was looking directly at the camera with an expression of calm, unshakable authority. My expression in that photo was the polar opposite of the sad little ghost they thought they knew. Beneath the photo, the text was stark and undeniable. Auden Vance, founder and CEO, Nexus Capital. I turned my head slowly and looked at my family. I saw Jocelyn's face cycle through a Rolodex of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, pure, unadulterated horror. Brielle's perfectly painted mouth was hanging open, her face a mask of slack-jawed shock. And my father, he looked like he had seen a ghost. And in a way, he had. The ghost of the daughter he had ignored, underestimated, and abandoned, had finally come back to haunt him. The silence stretched for an eternity, thick and brittle. It was Jocelyn who finally shattered it. "Turn it off," she shrieked, scrambling to her feet, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It's a lie. She's a nobody. She made it all up, the pathetic little liar." But her words had no power. The proof was on the screen, cold and corporate and irrefutable. Her outburst was just the desperate flailing of a queen whose castle had just been turned to dust. It was Mr. Davies, the justice outsider, who sealed her fate. He stood up slowly, his napkin falling from his lap. He ignored Jocelyn completely. He spoke to my father, his voice trembling not with anger, but with a profound, earth-shattering shock. "Harrison, that debt number. My God, is it real?" My father didn't answer. He couldn't. He just sat there, shrunken in his expensive suit, his face the color of ash. His silence was the only confession Mr. Davies needed. It was the confession the entire room needed. Jocelyn seemed to deflate. The fight went out of her, replaced by a horrifying understanding of her new reality. She stumbled, grabbing the back of Brielle's chair to keep from falling. Her life, her status, her entire world had been built on the foundation of Vance Manufacturing, and she had just watched its deed get signed over to the one person she had spent a decade trying to destroy. Brielle was white-faced, staring at me. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking at me with scorn or pity. She was looking at me with raw, primal fear. She was looking at me the way you look at something that holds your entire future in the palm of its hand. And then, a new sound cut through the tension. Clap. It was slow, deliberate. Clap. All eyes turned to the source. It was Aunt Genevieve. She was on her feet, a fierce, triumphant smile on her face. Clap. 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 She began to applaud, not politely, but with a defiant, resounding force that echoed the tectonic shift of power that had just occurred in that room. I picked up the microphone for the last time. The applause from my aunt died down, and the suffocating silence returned. I didn't look at the stunned guests. I didn't look at Jocelyn, who was now openly sobbing into her hands. I didn't look at Brielle, who looked like a frightened child. I looked at my father. Only at him. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of his daughter. It was the voice of Nexus Capital. It was calm, clinical, and devoid of all emotion. The Nexus Capital offer is to assume 100% of the company's $5.2 million debt, I stated, the numbers falling like chips of ice into the quiet room. In exchange for full ownership and controlling interest. My signature is already on the documents. I paused, letting the finality of that statement sink in. Yours is the only one missing. The papers are on your desk, in your study. You have until midnight to sign them. I didn't say what would happen if he didn't. I didn't have to. The alternative was bankruptcy, public ruin, the loss of everything. He knew it. They all knew it. I placed the microphone gently back on the podium. I turned my back on the wreckage of my family. With 60 pairs of eyes following my every move, I walked out of the ballroom, through the grand foyer, and out the front door into the cool night air, without a single look back. I didn't need to. There was nothing left there for me to see. So, my deal saved 200 jobs and the company name, but it cost my stepmother and stepsister their entire lavish lifestyle. Aita for using the power they never knew I had to completely dismantle the world they built on my back. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for watching.